Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Heather Bullock, and I'm the immediate past president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, or SPICY. I'm also the director of the Center for Economic Justice and Action and a professor of psychology at the University of California, Santa Cruz. We are excited to celebrate the release of Rethinking Inequality, using psychological science to advance economic justice. This cross-divisional project brought together psychologists from academia, healthcare, and government to examine the effects of inequality and offer real-world policy solutions. You can find the complete volume on SPICY's website. We will also post a link for you. We hope you'll download it and that it will become a valuable resource and a powerful call to action. We are so thankful for our wonderful divisional partners on this project: the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, the Division on Adult Development and Aging, the Society for the Psychology of Women, the Society for Child and Family Policy and Practice, the Society for Health Psychology, the American Psychology Law Society, and the Psychology of Social Class Organization, or POSCO. Funding from the American Psychological Association Committee on Division APA Relations helped support this project, and we are incredibly grateful. I want to give special thanks to Sam Abbott, SPICY's Communications and Policy Director. Sam and I worked on this project from its inception, and I'm grateful for his many contributions to bringing this work to fruition. Please note that any opinions or conclusions expressed in Rethinking Inequality and the webinar series are those of individual contributors and do not reflect the views of participating organizations, the American Psychological Association, or any divisions or subunits. In the United States and around the world, economic inequality is among the defining issues of our time. Last year, 1% of U.S. households controlled nearly 1/3 of all wealth, while half of the country struggled for less than 3%. Such disparity is not only socially corrosive, but also democratically and economically unsustainable. Rethinking Inequality challenges the all too common dismissal of economic inequality as inevitable or too big to successfully address. Instead, we make the case that poverty and economic inequality are the result of policy choices, and that we can, in fact, reduce economic inequality. We also show why psychological science is essential to understanding and reversing inequality. Each paper in the volume shows how inequality results from systems that constrain opportunity and distribute risk unevenly across communities, not individual shortcomings. Today's webinar, sorry about that. Today's webinar, Equity-Focused Interventions, is our second of 3 webinars featuring briefs in the volume. People's economic experiences are shaped by many factors, notably race, gender, age, and social status. For some, identity confers advantage, while for others, prejudice, stereotypes, and long-standing systemic inequities contribute to intersecting disadvantage. To create a just economy, policymakers must support interventions that are responsive to people's experiences, particularly specific groups. This is not preferential treatment. Rather, it is about creating the economic conditions in which we can all thrive. Today's authors from the Division on Adult Development and Aging, APA Division 20, the Society for Children, Family Policy and Practice, Division 37, and the Society for the Psychology of Women, Division 35, focus on some of the populations that are especially vulnerable to the cumulative detrimental effects of economic inequality. We'll have time at the end for Q&A with presenters. First, we will hear from Dr. Walter Boot, who will discuss his paper, Financial Exploitation and Abuse of Older Americans, A Call to Action, co-authored with Marguerite de Lima and Shinoy Choi. Their brief focuses on an understudied but growing crisis of financial fraud and abuse among older adults. Dr. Boot is the Irving Sherwood Wright Professor in Geriatrics within the Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine and Associate Director of the Center for Aging and Behavioral Research at the Weill Cornell Medicine. His research focuses on how existing and emerging technologies, including virtual reality and artificial intelligence, can support the health, well-being, quality of life, and social connectivity of older adults. Please join me in welcoming him.
Okay, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Okay, I think Heather, you'll need to stop sharing. Okay. Okay. Okay, can you see that okay? Okay, great. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the policy brief that Division 20 put forward, that's adult development and aging. We compiled this as part of the CODAPAR project, and we're grateful for the leadership here on that project. Older Americans lose tens of billions of dollars each year to financial exploitation. And we argue that this is a critical issue of economic and social justice, where the systematic targeting of older adults creates profound consequences, not just for those who are targeted, but their families and society as well. This should be a top priority of the US government. And unfortunately, recent efforts to improve government efficiency may be undoing important safeguards that protect older adults, their family, and financial institutions from immense harm. So let me start by providing a definition of what we mean by financial exploitation. At its core, financial exploitation involves the illegal use or improper use of older adults' money, their property, their assets, for someone else's benefit. And this can happen in a number of different ways. It can happen through outright theft, but also can often include deception, coercion, manipulation, and undue influence. Importantly, these crimes are not just limited to crimes committed by strangers. They can be carried out by acquaintances and, in many cases, by trusted individuals such as family members and caregivers. And one of the biggest challenges is that it's often unreported and difficult to detect. It can happen gradually behind closed doors, and many cases do go unreported. So what we're seeing here is a problem that's both widespread and in many ways hidden. I'll give you some statistics about the problem and the prevalence of the problem as well. So, sorry. To understand the scope of this problem, it's helpful to look at some of the numbers. Older adults in the United States lose an estimated 28 to 81. Sorry, there's a fire drill going on right now. Okay. Um, To understand the scope of this problem, it's helpful to look at some of the numbers. Older adults in the United States lose an estimated 28 to 81 billion dollars each year to scams, fraud, and other forms of financial exploitation. So this is not a rare occurrence. It's suggested that as many as 1 in 15 older adults experience some form of financial exploitation each year. And that if we look at fraud specifically, up to 1 in 19 older adults are affected annually. But even these numbers likely underestimate the true scope of the problem. Financial exploitation is significantly underreported, often due to shame, fear of kind of losing independence. And again, I apologize, there's a fire alarm going off or a fire drill. The harms of financial exploitation extend beyond stolen funds, often leaving older adults unable to meet their basic needs and stripped of their independence. And unfortunately, there's little chance often of recovering their losses. And these consequences ripple outwards. They affect family members, they affect community members, they affect caregivers, they affect public systems, they affect financial institutions, undermining trust and contributing to serious decline in health and well-being. So the reality is that there are a number of victims that we see, but this is really an underestimate in terms of the number, the impact, and the total financial losses. These are almost certainly much higher than what we can measure today. So what we're seeing now, unfortunately, is that technology is making fraud easier. We're seeing that artificial intelligence, for example, is changing the landscape of financial scams in very important ways. AI can now generate highly convincing messages, mimic voices, and even create very convincing and realistic videos. That means scammers are no longer limited to poorly written emails or obvious red flags. Instead, they can sound like someone you know or a trusted organization, and that can make these scams much more difficult to detect. And this is especially concerning for older adults who are often targeted by these scams, who may be less familiar with how quickly these technologies are evolving and how they can be misused. Here's a concrete example of a couple from Pennsylvania. In this case, an older couple lost $18,000 in a very advanced grandparent scam. The scammers used AI to mimic the voice of their grandson. They called the grandmother and told her that their grandson had been arrested for a DUI and they urgently needed bail money. She truly believed she was talking to her grandson, which was an AI impersonation. The couple withdrew a large amount of money, not only once, but twice, handed it over through rideshare drivers to the criminals who are perpetrating this scam. And unfortunately, the money is expected not to be recovered. Another example here is highlighting the challenges with cryptocurrency. In this case, a woman received what was really purporting to be a warning from Microsoft saying her computer had been hacked along with her phone number, and that she needed to call for help. When she called, the person on the other end claimed that foreign IP addresses were actively stealing money out of her account, and the only way to make that money safe was to withdraw all of her money from an ATM and put it into a Bitcoin ATM. She was instructed to withdraw the money, told to deposit it at cash, and believing that, she took the action and lost all those resources. Only later did she realize she was defrauded. The scammers then escalated by posing as Federal Reserve agents, urging her to withdraw even more money, which was again lost. Because of cryptocurrency transactions, these were cryptocurrency transactions. These are difficult to trace and unlikely, again, that the money will be recovered. So, why are older adults often targeted here? One major reason is that older adults often have money, they have resources. Many older adults have accumulated a lifetime of savings. Many own their home outright or receive steady, reliable income through Social Security or pensions. So, they are attractive targets for scammers. From a scammer's perspective, that combination of makes them an easy target. But it's also the case that older adults, due to age-related changes, can be more susceptible to scams. As people get older, they can change in terms of cognitive abilities and decision-making processes, which make it harder to quickly evaluate whether something is legitimate or a scam. And these risks become even more pronounced for people experiencing cognitive impairment and functional limitations. In these cases, financial decision-making capacity can be influenced. And again, this is a reason why scammers may be targeting older adults. And it's important to recognize these individuals may have difficulty recognizing deceptive tactics or responding in the moment. So it's a combination of different things that put older adults at risk for fraud and make them susceptible to being targeted by criminals. So we're seeing a number of interesting and important intersecting trends. One is the rapid growth of older adults in the US population, meaning that this may become a much bigger problem. We are seeing from now until 2060 an increase of the 65 plus population in the United States from 58 million to 89 million. We are seeing increasing sophistication of fraud tools, which really means there's a growing urgency for the US government to invest in methods and resources to address this growing and urgent problem. Unfortunately, an important issue is policy, and we are seeing decreasing oversight and investment that would help older adults avoid these types of scams. Efforts to make the federal government more efficient are, in principle, a worthwhile goal, but in practice, some of these may actually be undermining protections of older adults. For example, scaling back support for agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau can weaken oversight. At the same time, proposed reductions in federal research funding limit our ability to understand these problems and develop effective prevention strategies. So while these measures are often framed as improving efficiency, they can actually be counterproductive. They can reduce our capacity to detect, prevent, and also respond to older adult financial exploitation, even as the financial and human costs continue to grow. So instead of streamlining a system, these cuts can create gaps in oversight, enforcement, and innovation that can be creating a disconnect between policies intent on helping older adults and real world outcomes. So this is a major challenge that our policy brief has taken to really think about how do we respond to this increasing challenge. And we came up with three policy recommendations in our proposal. Let's start with the first, which is to strengthen our consumer protection infrastructure. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau plays a central role in protecting older adults from financial exploitation, and we've been seeing that unfortunately the Financial Protection Bureau has come under attack. Um, it provides education resources, supports reporting systems, and works directly with financial institutions to identify suspicious behavior. This is important work, and it needs to be funded and supported to the fullest extent to do this important work. So one policy recommendation is preserving and expanding the CFPD PB, which is essential. Includes ensuring that reporting systems are easy to access and that responses to suspected fraud are timely and coordinated. Equally important is an increase in cross-agency collaboration. Without this really important infrastructure in place, we are essentially asking individuals to protect themselves against increasingly sophisticated scams on their own. The second challenge recommendation is a greater investment in research on how to develop interventions and detect fraud and help older adults. So we need to increase federal funding for financial exploitation research, including psychological research, which is critical here. We need to better understand risk factors and develop and test interventions that will help older adults avoid these types of frauds and exploitation and track emerging threats. And finally, we need better legislation. Another key area for action is legislation and regulation. We need stronger laws. We need to hold telecommunication companies accountable when these types of frauds are occurring using their technology. There needs to be better regulation of AI and cryptocurrency, which can be targets or tools that criminals use for defrauding older adults. So to conclude, financial exploitation of older adults is not a small and isolated issue. It's widespread and costly, with billions of dollars lost each year. These losses are just not financial, but they impact health, they impact independence, they impact quality of life, not just of the individual who's been defrauded, but the people around them as well. At the same time, we're facing converging trends that put older adults at greater risk, including changes in technology such as AI and deep fakes that make fraud more convincing. And without strong protections, this problem will only get worse. But good news, I think, is that there is clear path forward. There are targets for legislation and for government funding to help protect older adults and make sure that we are considering this an important area of economic justice and social justice, and economic justice. So I just want to thank, again, the organizers here, as well as APA for the CODAPAR funding that put this all together, and my great collaborators on this project, Margaret DeLima and Shanae Choi. And you can see the policy brief for a lot more information and references. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You gave us a lot to think about. Next, we will hear from Melissa Palmer, who will discuss her policy brief, Meeting the Developmental Needs of Young Children Experiencing Homelessness, which is co-authored with Drs. Jeanette Herbers and JJ Coutilli. Their policy brief identifies key programmatic touchpoints and practice priorities to support children experiencing housing disruptions. Dr. Palmer is an assistant professor at the University of Utah and a developmental clinical psychologist. Her research focuses on identifying mechanisms of risk and resilience for early childhood mental health and well-being in the context of poverty. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us today.
Audio. Hi, guys. I am so happy to be here. I think I shared my screen well. As mentioned, I wrote this with Dr. Herbers and Dr. Catuli. They are fantastic scientists and experts in this space, and I really encourage you guys to check out their work if you get a chance. And they send their hellos and are sad that they can't be here today. I also, as mentioned, wrote this as a part of Division 37 for the Society of Child and Family Policy and Practice. Um, as I get started, I wanted to start off by defining what I mean when I talk about families experiencing homelessness. And the reason I do this is that there are currently two primary definitions that rule research and policy alike. So we have the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, who uses a definition of literal homelessness in their reports. And that usually refers to individuals residing in shelters or being unsheltered, so staying in places not meant for human habitation. And a lot of government programs also use this HUD definition for service eligibility. However, when we're talking about families who are experiencing housing instability, the vast majority of them are staying in hotels or motels or doubling up with friends or relatives due to economic hardship. So, in fact, about 84% of families sort of fall into this category. And this definition, which authorizes various education and early childhood programs for homelessness, acknowledges these other forms of homelessness through something called the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And a lot of researchers and policy advocates have concluded that these inconsistencies between the HUD and education definitions and counts often represent sort of this data dilemma, which can contribute to public misunderstanding and underfunding to a variety of essential services. And so, as we get started today, I want to really emphasize that when we're talking about the experience of housing instability, we really advocate for policies and initiatives, including things like funding formulas, to adopt this broader definition of homelessness so that we can better sort of serve families experiencing housing instability beyond those just in the shelter system. Mostly because we really feel like family homelessness can look really different than individual experiences of homelessness, and federal definitions need to be uniform and match the reality of where families experiencing homelessness are. But using the data we do have, we know that early childhood experiences of homelessness are unfortunately fairly common. Using that HUD definition, we have been able to estimate that about 1.2 million 0 to 6 year olds a year experience homelessness, and nearly half of children in emergency or transitional shelters are under the age of 6. We also know that this experience disproportionately affects racial and ethnic minorities, immigrant communities, as well as people with disabilities. And we know that Black, Native, and Latina individuals are more likely to experience homelessness with children compared to white families. And that this disparity is really rooted in systemic racism, including those ongoing impacts of slavery, segregation, housing discrimination, incarceration, and disparities in healthcare access. Unfortunately, this problem is continuing to increase. From 2023 to 2024, we saw a 33% increase in family homelessness. And this is expected to continue due to an affordable housing crisis. One analysis of family renter households found that there were only 29 affordable and appropriately sized rental units for every 100 family rental households that need a space to live. And so this is an issue that is ongoing and likely going to continue to worsen given sort of economic scarcity right now in the United States. And as the experience of early childhood occurs during a time of rapid brain development, developmental theory and research shows that development is not just dependent on individuals, but also on the individual's interactions between multiple levels of environmental experience. And early childhood is thought to be a sensitive period for development that is particularly sensitive to environmental experiences. So children's neurobiological and behavioral responses are slowly specializing to the environments that they're being raised in. And they're families experiencing homelessness are often experiencing high cumulative risk and stress related to financial strain and a higher likelihood of being exposed to adverse events and exposures to community violence. And indeed, a lot of our sort of basic research in this field has shown that early experiences of homelessness during early childhood make developmental challenges more likely in almost every domain we've assessed. That includes cognition, speech, education, mental health, and physical health. And this isn't just concurrently, but also with long-term longitudinal outcomes. However, not all kids who experience early homelessness have poor outcomes. And I think the reason we were motivated to write this report is that policymakers and practitioners have tools to support children's resilience and healthy development. And resilient outcomes of individuals, especially in this early period, depends on the resilience of their many interconnected systems. And so that includes their direct relationships, family social supports, as well as societal structures. And I think we can really capitalize on this early sensitivity period to promote positive experiences that positively influence child development over time. All of that to be said, I think that there are social service systems that can support resilience when they're effective in identifying children's and families' needs through screening and are really intentional about ensuring access for families to the support that they need and ensuring that children's basic needs are being met. So with that, I'm going to take us into a couple of the policy recommendations that we talked about. I'm going to back it up by talking about what science has told us. What do we know can work? What are barriers to sort of what our current infrastructure is, and what are our recommendations to take us those couple steps forward. So as far as what has worked, our first recommendation is to mitigate harm, to mitigate risk. And we have seen in a variety of experimental and observational studies that rental assistance with rental choice, longer stays, and private rooms do reduce child maladaptation over time. We also know that getting early nutrition and cash-based support has been linked to improved cognition and academic outcomes for kids. Unfortunately, as we've discussed, there is a housing shortage, and this also includes HUD-funded housing. Only 25% of eligible families who went through this process and said, hey, like, yes, you are eligible to receive this housing assistance, actually receive those service supports. Further, these are not guaranteed funding lines, making these programs really subject to legislative cuts each new cycle. And we know that a lot of families are really scared to show up and disclose housing status, in particular for fear of Child Protective Service involvement. And finally, evaluations of sort of shelter programming has found that shelter environments are often not very conducive to meet the developmental needs of young children. So our recommendations are around permanently authorizing or expanding core anti-poverty programs for children and families, as well as trying to invest in developmentally and appropriately supportive shelter and housing designs. And so when we're talking about that, we're talking about paying attention to environmental toxins, such as lead or mold or asbestos, giving kids access to green spaces where they can engage cognitively as well as develop motor skills, and making sure that where they're staying is clean and that families have private spaces. Any of you that have ever hung out with a 2-year-old know that tantrums are really common, but those sorts of tantrums or challenges with sleep become really, really controversial in these group living spaces. Further, a lot of shelters don't have developmentally appropriate resources. I've talked to shelters that don't have cribs available, that don't have toys available, that don't have play spaces available for families and children. Or if those play spaces are available, they're often closed because they don't have the staffing in order to allow families to access that space. Our second recommendation is around increasing access to early developmental screening. Our research has suggested that there's an increased environmental risk for developmental delays and differences within this population. And we really want to increase standardized access to these families in this space. And so we know that in pediatric contexts, when their governing agencies have standardized and recommended screening practices, we've seen increased and improved diagnostic and referral pathways for young kids. We also know that Head Start, which is an early preschool program for low-income families, does mandate developmental screening, and that these programs do have preferential access for families experiencing homelessness. We also know that some states mandate universal screening, and that has worked really well in order to identify young kids in need of services. And finally, we know that when families experiencing homelessness are connected to services, we do see positive benefits and outcomes for their kids. Unfortunately, some barriers is that these families tend to lack access to screening locations. Due to the migratory nature of housing instability, there's often inconsistent pediatric access or inconsistent access to early education programs. Further, there's been a lot of research around parents not wanting to enroll their kids in early education. And that is likely due, if we take a trauma informed lens, to fears for their kids being victimized in those spaces and settings. There's also universal screening not available in all settings. And again, families don't necessarily want to disclose housing risk, and practitioners don't always screen for or ask about it. So, our recommendation here is for interagency collaboration, so to increase family outreach, as well as increase our understanding of housing instability and developmental milestones. We also want to consider universal free early screening approaches. So if we provide early universal screening for all kids, that can decrease stigma for engaging in early screening overall, and can be made available independent of enrollment in specific programs or showing up to specific pediatric offices. And then finally, funding is always at the core here. And there are some interesting state level examples of how to maintain sustainable funding for universal screening programs. Okay, so our final recommendation is around if we screen and kids get flagged, we need to have really clear and easy like connections to family-based and trauma-informed early prevention and intervention services. We know early intervention improves kids' outcomes, and a lot of those early intervention services are provided through IDEA Part C, so that's going to be your PT, OT, speech, those sorts of things. We also know that family-based prevention programs have a strong return on investment. So those are like your nurse-family partnership programs or home visiting programs. And we know that early Head Start and Head Start have really positive impacts on development and health and education. And a recent project that Dr. Catulli has been involved in has shown that by building cross-system collaborations, we actually see increases in engagement in intervention systems. So currently in Philadelphia, the enrollment rates are 600% greater than the national average because of these cross-system collaboration efforts and designs. Barriers are around eligibility for early intervention services. There's the potential to build in early environmental risk into IDEA Part C eligibility. A few states have it, and I think there can be an argument for increasing that across states. We also know that infants and toddlers experiencing homelessness do not enroll in early ed or home visiting programs. Only 1 in 10 infants are enrolled in those programs. And further, there are those continued concerns about safety as well as difficulty navigating paperwork and transportation. And so what we want to do is, again, strengthen that integration, expand eligibility, think about place-based and co-located services, have dedicated outreach staff, and ensure early intervention access is not dependent on an enrollment in specific programs. And so, I think in conclusion that we really can use deliberate, sustained, and responsible investment to disrupt the cycle of homelessness and to promote resilience. And that these actions aren't just compassionate, but really cost effective and backed by research. And with that, I'll say thank you, encourage you to read the whole brief, as well as I have a couple different resources that might be helpful for practitioners alike.
Thank you. That was a terrific several presentations and a lot of overlap in the last one from Dr. Palmer. So good timing.
So let me go ahead and introduce our final presenters. Final presenters are Dr. Lauren Mizcock, Alexis Jones, and Erica Carr, who will discuss their brief, Housing Justice for Women Who Experience Serious Mental Illness, also co-authored with Shakina Brown. Their brief focuses on how women and mothers navigate interlocking mental health and housing challenges and offers policy and case management strategies that promote family and economic stability. Dr. Mizcock is core faculty in the clinical psychology PhD program at Fielding Graduate University and a licensed psychologist in private practice in San Francisco. She's co-chair of the Women with Serious Mental Illness and Feminist Parenthood Committees of Division 35 and also serves on the executive committee of the Society for the Psychology of Women. Dr. Jones is an NIMH T32 postdoctoral fellow in mental health policy at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Jones' program of research focuses on identifying and addressing health disparities while promoting health equity among marginalized populations. And Dr. Carr is an associate professor at Yale School of Medicine and also serves as the director of the Inpatient Psychology Service and director of behavioral intervention. She's the current president of Division 35, the Society for the Psychology of Women, and has expertise in serious mental illness, social justice, and advocacy. So please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, Dr. Bullock. Yes, our topic is housing justice for women who experience serious mental illness, and we are delighted to have been invited to work on this fabulous series of policy briefs. Appreciate the introductions. Our contributors today, Dr. Carr was in the lead, and Dr. Jones and I will take the presentation today, and Dr. Brown also made a valuable contribution to the writing. To sum up quickly and brief our policy, most women with serious mental illness have children but risk custody loss due to higher rates of poverty and homelessness than their peers. Mothers in social and mental health service programs are more likely to face custody challenges, causing additional trauma and mental health disruptions. Programs that do provide wraparound supportive housing services for mothers with SMI demonstrate positive outcomes for their recovery and maintaining child custody. And yet there's a national shortage of these programs and they're underfunded. So we're recommending that policymakers increase federal and state funding for comprehensive and multifaceted housing programs for these mothers who are homeless, and to also fund specialized case management services which have demonstrated good outcomes. Women with serious mental illness include a group of folks who have a major mental health disorder that leads to functional impairment in at least two areas of functioning: social, occupational, or educational, and activities of daily living or self-care. Some typical diagnoses that are included in this umbrella include severe depression, sometimes with psychotic features, bipolar disorders, schizophrenia spectrum disorders, severe OCD, and though not a DSM-5 TR diagnosis, complex PTSD is often included. We see a large co-occurrence of substance use and chronic illnesses and disability in this group. So as you can see in this diagram, the challenges for women with SMI are interactional and self-reinforcing. For example, for women with serious mental illness, there may be difficulty with mental health symptoms and suicidality, which can contribute to substance use as a means to cope, which can contribute to experiences of poverty and homelessness, which can in turn worsen mental health. When Dr. Carr and I got started doing this research about 15 years ago on women with serious mental illness, we noticed that most of the literature on women with SMI was on motherhood. And this represented, important focus, but also some moral panic about questions as to whether these women were fit to be mothers. And though there may be some legitimate concerns, there were some extreme measures in the past and current, including a history of forced sterilization of tens of thousands of people in asylums with mental illness. Hence, institutionalization prevented motherhood, and now with deinstitutionalization eras, we see that there's a large number of mothers amongst women with SMI at rates of equal to or greater than the general population. On the other hand, motherhood does boost well-being amongst this group in many cases, and many did not anticipate becoming mothers with SMI. Sometimes the SMI develops during pregnancy and in the postpartum period. In addition, motherhood is sometimes the only meaningful role for these women to pursue in society if they have difficulty working or attending school. We also see that motherhood can motivate recovery from symptoms and suicidality and thus boost child well-being. So we need support for these mothers to sustain their mental health, housing, and custody. Custody loss is a huge issue for women with SMI, and up to 90% of these mothers most leave hospital without their baby, and we see a higher risk of custody loss amongst women of color with SMI as a result of racial ethnic disparities. As mentioned by Dr. Palmer, we also see that there may be a barrier to seeking care because we do see a correlation of custody loss among those who are having greater interactions with mental health and social service systems, so they may try to avoid them. And while mandated reporting can be a vital safeguard, it can also be a reactionary measure. So we really need the housing, parenting, and mental health supports to make mandated reporting a last resort option. Homeless families are increasing, as seen in the last presentation as well. Amongst homeless folks, there's an increasing rate of up to 37% of families in this group, according to some estimates, most of which are single-headed by women with very young children, estimates of around 2 kids under 6 years most commonly. And so we see risks of food insecurity, illness, trauma, and substance use in these parents and families. Federal Clear the Streets initiatives pose unique challenges for mothers with serious mental illness as a result. So supportive housing programs are needed to boost maternal mental health and increase housing stability, which have been found to have improved trajectories for mothers and children that increase stability and recovery from the serious mental illness. A few good examples of supported housing programs that have been effective include the Threshold Mothers Project in Illinois, which is a residential program that provides healthcare, childcare, substance use, and mental health treatment. Remarkable outcomes and suggests high rates of retention, next to 0 rates of hospitalization over the course of the stay, and major reductions in custody loss. In addition, the Family Critical Time Intervention in California provides case management to mothers with SMI who are homeless and helps them transition from homelessness into housing. They also show really strong outcomes in improving mothers' mental health symptoms and behavioral symptoms amongst children in these families. So we need programs with multidimensional integration of housing, parenting supports, mental health care, and case management. I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones.
Thank you. And so this slide shifts us from describing the problem to outlining policy solutions. The first policy mandate is multifaceted housing infrastructure. The central recommendation is that supportive housing must be explicitly designed for mothers with serious mental illness and their children. That means first, funding family inclusive models that allow for mothers to live with their children, rather than excluding families by design. Second, it means embedding mental health services directly into supportive housing so that mothers are not forced to navigate fragmented systems in different locations. And third, it means integrating child-focused infrastructure such as therapeutic daycares, after-school programming, and school reentry support. And finally, it means requiring 24/7 staffing so that crises can be addressed proactively on site instead of escalating into emergency service use or hospitalization. And so the broader message here is that housing should not just be a bed. It should be an ecosystem of support. And if we are really serious about recovery and family preservation, then supportive housing has to be structured around the realities of parenting, mental health needs, and safety. And then the next slide, please. Yes. And so the second policy mandate focuses on specialized case management. Here, the emphasis is on funding the kinds of support that that help mothers sustain stability over time and not just obtain housing temporarily. And so this includes trauma-informed care that explicitly recognizes the overlapping effects of serious mental illness, homelessness, and prior family separation. It also includes funding concurrent interventions such as vocational counseling, career coaching, and parenting supports that work alongside the mother as she navigates daily life. Our recommendations also push back against rigid one-size-fits-all timelines by calling for time-tailored support that can adapt to the changing needs of individual families. And finally, it recommends expanding the utility of Section 8 by linking housing vouchers more intentionally with mental health and substance use services. And so the key idea here is that case management for this population, it must be specialized, relational, and flexible. Generic models are not enough. Mothers with serious mental illness often need supports that acknowledge the full complexity of their circumstances and build stability across multiple domains at once. And so the final content slide here addresses a common policy question. Can we afford this? And the argument here is that we are already paying for system failure. The hidden costs of status quo include repeated inpatient psychiatric hospitalizations, emergency foster care, and child welfare interventions, and the long term generational consequences of disrupted education and childhood homelessness. By contrast, the return on investment for integrated systems is substantial. As the slide notes, integration can decrease hospitalizations, strengthen family cohesion, support workforce reentry, and reduce the burden on public health, social services, and child welfare systems. So, this is not simply a moral argument, though it certainly is that. It is also an economic argument. Fragmented, crisis oriented systems are expensive. Um, so when we think about preventative, integrated, and family-centered systems are not only more humane, they are more likely more efficient and sustainable in the long term. And so in other words, redesigning systems for mothers with serious mental illness is not an added cost. It's a smarter investment. And so to close, thank you again for being here and engaging in this important issue. We hope that this presentation has made clear that mothers of serious mental illness do not need more surveillance, more fragmentation, or more punitive responses. They need systems that are designed to support recovery, preserve families, and address the structural realities that shape mental health outcomes. And we appreciate the opportunity to share this with you all.
Thank you so much to everyone. We will open things up for questions, and I'll turn things over to Sam.
Thank you, Dr. Bullock, and thank you, everyone, for your great presentations. We have about 10 minutes or so left for any questions for our panelists, so please use that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to submit those. I wanted to start off with one that Dr. Jones's last slide really teed up, which was this issue of return on investment. Part of the impetus for this entire section on equity-focused interventions is that this is not about preferential treatment, but about creating conditions in which everyone can thrive. Yet we live in a political environment where identity-specific policies, particularly as they pertain to race and gender, can be deemed inherently discriminatory. I wonder how this work can help policymakers understand this distinction and why it really matters. Anyone wanted to take that one? Another way of phrasing it might be, how is this return on investment realized? Even though we are in some cases talking about some expensive, very targeted interventions for specific populations. Dr. Jones discussed it, but there were others as well.
One of the things I would say, like to expand on what Dr. Jones said, is like, we're already spending massive amounts of money to help children that are taken from their mothers who experience serious mental illness, to help the mothers who go into actually more inpatient care, because all these things are interconnected and their symptoms may get worse around the loss of their children. And you see all this as you work with people in real time. But if we could be more proactive and helpful, less harmful to women and their families, I think what happens is, because of the increased likelihood for women to come into connection with mental health services and social services and the danger that they feel for that connection, because they're increased likelihood to get their children just taken away rather than to have support on how to be an effective mother and being supported in everything they need with like the housing supports, wraparound services, then actually there's less overall cost, and like we make better and happier families for mothers and for children. And I actually think in the long term, there's a better return on that investment, if that makes sense. And Dr. Boot, I think you were going to say something.
Well, yeah, I was going to say something very similar that when an older adult is defrauded out of money, and then there's a loss of independence, and then there are physical and mental consequences for the older adult, caregivers, family members. Somebody has to pay those costs. There are societal costs associated with this. And I think there's a great return on investment to make sure that older adults keep their funds, keep their homes. And yeah, it's a very similar answer that these are things that if there are not the finances for older adults to support themselves, then someone has to pay that, and it's a societal cost. It's US cost to the U.S. taxpayer. So yeah, it's just I think a great return on investment.
Yeah, and I'm happy to jump in too from like an early childhood perspective. We know that I was trying to hammer home this idea that there's a lot of opportunity for our environment to shape long-term developmental trajectories. And that includes like the intergenerational experience of housing instability and homelessness, right? And so by investing early in supporting families and supporting kiddos who may need a little bit of extra support or intervention, then we know that that decreases costs throughout that child's developmental trajectory, including in involvement with things like juvenile justice or additional mental health or behavioral supports that are more longstanding and take longer to implement later on, too.
Something that your presentations brought up, and something that I see a lot in economic policy, is the importance of persistent myths about poverty and inequality and the people that are impacted by these circumstances. Dr. Bullock, you've written extensively about this over the years. I'm wondering if for the authors here, if you could sort of wave a magic wand and erase some of these myths from a policymaker's mind, what would it be for your particular group that you're looking at?
I think for me, like one of the myths I would wave is like this myth that, and like as we've seen historically for so many years, that women with serious mental illness and such conditions can't mother and be good mothers. And actually, I've seen many that are tremendous mothers. Um, and with the appropriate support, they can be even better mothers. And I think that uh, that's like the damage we've done throughout our nation of just automatically seeing a diagnosis and then having a stigma associated with it, and then that taking away the capabilities for them to do their best at that role. So like waving a magic wand to help all of us as a society um, relook at our own biases and stigma that impacts the lives of so many people, not just mothers, but like all these children that may be separated. And we know the ACEs studies about what happens to children that get separated from their parents. It's a very big deal, even if someone has a serious mental illness. So that's one of the things that I would like try to help people see from a very different perspective. And then if we do help those mothers, they can actually be very effective. And the research we have is that there's better outcomes for both children and the mothers.
Yeah, and I would love to actually jump in on that. We have a couple papers from my graduate research group that like says exactly that. Regardless of mental health status, it's really the like parenting behavior and relationship that matters the most. And that you see that buffer against negative child outcomes over and above risk related to mental health or other sort of disabilities or differences.
2 more minutes left. We got a question from Daniel in the chat. It says, given the barriers to advancing economic equality at the federal level over the next few years, what state and local policy strategies do you think can actually move the needle on economic justice in communities? And I think some of your policy recommendations touched on that. Dr. Boots, obviously the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, that starts at the highest level of government, but are there things we're seeing at the individual community level that we can really play as an example during this period?
Yeah, I think that there are definitely organizations and institutions within states and within cities that can do very similar things, making sure that consumers are protected, making sure that older adults are protected. And also, I think there are great opportunities that once fraud does occur, I mean, we can't prevent all the bad things from happening, but are there local resources and state resources that can then be directed to help people? Because as I mentioned, these funds are often difficult or impossible to recover. So I think that the state and local responsibilities are there as well.
Yeah, and I highlighted this a little bit in my brief, but the Bell Project that Dr. Catulli is involved in is a city-focused project, right, around this collaboration between multiple interagencies and really building local connections and sort of getting the ear and investment of local government and doing those processes. And we see really fantastic outcomes at that local level as well. And so, like, of course, while I would love to see this federal level difference, I think that there's a lot of movement we can make in more local spheres in and outside of the government alike.
And I don't know if Dr. Mizaker Jones would have some thoughts about this, but like I think I'm in Connecticut and we have really great resources, thankfully, for people with mental illness and related to people who experience homelessness. Though, like, it's interesting, there's not a lot of projects related specifically to this. So I think it's something that hopefully I can take back to our own commissioner and people that are like figuring out what to do with our mental health dollars and the dollars that go into helping house people, of making this intersection. And I think that they would love to hear more about like things that work, because we also are working with people that have these challenges repetitively through the system and then they don't know what to do. And I'm on the case conferences left and right, and it's the same sad story. So I think the more we can build it like on a local or state level that has resources, is still willing to invest in these areas, I think the more potential we have federally and nationally to grow. And I think it's about timing, right? Like, we're doing this now, and maybe federally things aren't that open right now, but I don't think that can always last. And so I think it's also about planning with timing.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. That's something a lot of us discussed throughout this entire project of, are the ideas that are being presented throughout this entire volume at all feasible on the federal level, given this current period? And it's very often a process of sort of socializing them and introducing them to the public, sometimes for years, if not decades, before that policy window opens. And projects like this that marshal the evidence are so important for policymakers having the tools they need, the information they need in order to take advantage of those windows when they do open. It is 1 o'clock. We are at time. So I want to thank our presenters and just briefly, this webinar is the second in a 3-part series marking the release of Rethinking Inequality. If you missed the first webinar, titled Achieving Economic Stability, that featured Dr. Harmony Rapand from the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues and Dr. Claus Calaviri from the Psychology of Social Class Organization, discussing the benefits of guaranteed income programs and the economic and psychological imperative of raising the minimum wage. That webinar is available on the SPICY YouTube page. I'm dropping a link in the chat to walk and chew bubblegum here. This series will conclude in 3 weeks on April 1st at 1 p.m. with the webinar Legal and Economic Justice, and I'll put the registration link in the chat as well. That webinar will explore the ways in which our legal and economic systems are intertwined with disparities in one system often reflected in the other. Dr. Shannon Perkins and Sienna Alexis from the Society for Health Psychology, that's APA Division 38, will discuss medical legal partnerships, an emerging model to expand legal aid to low-income patients to address legal and social determinants of health. And then Dr. Sarah Appleby and Dr. Jen Perilla from the American Psychology Law Society, APA Division 41, will present on the criminalization of poverty and successful models for reforming the criminal legal system. We hope that you will join us for those sessions in 3 weeks. In the meantime, please visit www.spici.org/rethinking inequality, download the full volume, and read all of these wonderful briefs. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you to our wonderful presenters. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week.